I'm Carter Wilson, and you're watching The Break It Down Show.
Carter Wilson joins us. Carter has written a number of books. Today we're going to discuss The Dead Husband. And it's, I mean, what would you call it? A thriller? Is that what you'd call it?
I would call it that. Yeah, a psychological thriller. It gets classified as a lot of different things. Domestic suspense is another.
Well, this is the thing, right? Like we've learned so much about genres that we can change our mind on what it is. And that's really why I ask. I mean, because just saying a thriller, you got to put some adjectives in there. So what would you say it is? Like, how would you categorize it? Forget the publishers and everything else. How do you categorize it?
I like calling it domestic suspense. It's, domestic being it's about a family. It involves a family. When you say thriller, it can involve, like you said, it could be world apocalypse. I write stories that are very small in terms of who they affect, but how what they're going through is major, but it's usually a family.
When you are sorting out a story, well, first off, let's back up before that. When did you figure out that this was your voice? Because I'm sure you have a lot of things you'd like to write, but you simply don't have the time and the ability to get good enough at it to be,
Yeah. I don't know if that's true. I started writing. I didn't start writing until I was 33, and I just started writing these books kind of literally on a day, with no experience doing it. And what I wrote was some pretty dark shit. And my agent, who I was fortunate enough to get, kind of said, "Oh, you're writing thrillers." I'm like, "Oh, okay. I didn't know that. I just was writing scary stuff." So yeah, I enjoy, and I've honed that voice over time. I've probably gone a little bit from more almost the horror realm to just kind of dark psychological thrillers. I like the voice of people who are struggling to figure things out and who don't trust not only the things around them, but the things in their head, and fighting to figure out how do they get out of whatever is being thrown at them.
How much does day-to-day life inform you? Like, I know, like when I'm watching the news or I see an article published, about like space or something like that, that informs me to go, hey, this is interesting. Let me grab the author of this, or let me grab this PhD, or, this speaker. How much does day-to-day life inform your writing?
Not too much. I honestly stay away a lot from the news. But I will say I've had moments of inspiration where I'll read about some weird story. In one of my books, Mr. Tinder's Girl, which was based on the Slender Man stabbings, was that personified. I read the first paragraph of this horrifically creepy article about this incident, and I stopped reading because I'm like, I'm writing about this. I don't want to know what happened, but that first paragraph is what's important to me. So, and certainly TV shows. If I see an opening scene of a TV show that just completely jolts me, I get fascinated by, well, what about that was so interesting, and how could I possibly think about utilizing some of that?
Yeah, that's great. I love to hear that people are inspired by things. I just right now on Netflix they're showing Saving Private Ryan. You talk about an opening paragraph. Good gracious, that's it's such a powerful thing. And then if you stick with that movie and you watch it a few times, you see all of these moments like that where you could inspire thought. I mean, not necessarily write a war story, but there's just so much humanity in that movie that you're forced to deal with a lot of emotions along that ride. And that's what makes it so great.
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned combat movies, and that's a huge trigger for me for whatever reason. I can watch a lot of stuff, but a really well done war movie, will unnerve me for days on end. So when I saw Saving Private Ryan, I was myself shell shocked. It felt like, and I'm like, wow, I almost had to leave that movie because it was so real and so intense. And yet, I can write stuff like that, but I have a really hard time watching it when it's really well done.
When you say really well done, what other movies come to mind for you? It doesn't have to be combat movies, but what movies come to mind where you're like, this movie inspires me to do things or think about things in different ways?
Oh, any adaptation of like a Cormac McCarthy novel, I watched The Road or No Country for Old Men, and I just the sweeping scenes, and then just the attention to detail on the little things that or how they present kind of the villain. where it's just everything is kind of subtle and not over the top. And I have such an appreciation for that, because it just allows the viewer or the reader, if it's a book, to use their own imagination to insert a lot of the details. And I think that's important.
The other day we had on Jack Carr, and I was asking him about leaps for the audience. I mean, you get into scary, dark stuff. I mean, in The Dead Husband, it happens pretty much right away. So when you're thinking about taking the audience on this ride, how many leaps do you think you can pull them over where, like, maybe you're a little bit too close to fantasy and away from reality? Although your stuff reads very real, by the way. But
thank you.
How many leaps do you get, do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question, because you don't really know what a leap is until somebody else is exposed to it, right? Because I'll be writing something, I'm like, yeah, I think this is rooted in reality. I think it's believable. And somebody might say that just, even when you think you have it totally down, you'll get reviews that say, there's too much suspension of disbelief. So I try to stay rooted, because that's what I enjoy reading or watching. I like to feel, what if this were me? That's very important when I write, is like, I want to, and I don't outline. So I'm like walking through these characters' shoes. I'm like, wow, what the hell would I do in this situation? And, it's funny, like a lot of times when I was an early writer and having things rejected, one of my comments that I got a lot back from editors was my heroes were too weak. And that was always purposeful, because I wanted them to, because I thought, this is an everyday person. And if you face this confrontation, you're going to fail most of the time. And that was interesting to me. But there's a fine line, because readers don't want to just see somebody fail all the time. So I've learned a lot over the years.
I think Enemy of the State did that pretty well. I mean, granted, Will Smith is kind of a badass in the end, but you have this dad who doesn't have this plan for his life, and then all of a sudden he's neck deep in this, thriller. And
yeah.
But it wasn't too much. I mean, some of the technology stuff, but that happens later. Like, we've been shown how to jump over these chasms. I think it's credit to Gene Hackman, obviously, but also, Will Smith's ability to pull off this everyman guy who, if blending is a priority in his life, it's one of the things he says in the movie, maybe he's probably fit enough to go run around and do all these things. So there is something to understanding what a leap is, and maybe building some poles, laying some poles across the chasm. So someone's like, oh, I can use this pole to get across this chasm.
Yeah. And you want to introduce people who maybe have the ability to do something beyond what they would have thought possible, but they're doing it for the first time because of the extreme surge. That's what's fun, is to watch somebody like, what would you do? Like, would you actually do this to save your family? Without a history of ever having done that, because that's relatable. It's like, oh shit, I don't know if I would do that. That's pretty crazy. So I love exploring that territory and seeing how the characters kind of react to it.
Reaction to adversity. It's something when you're sitting in your couch, I mean, you think about, when was the last time you fell down? And you're like, oh man, I fell down, that hurt. Like a football player can be in their 35s and they fall down 100 times a day, and so it's no big deal to them. But just simply falling down at the age of plus 40,
Oh, I did it a month ago, skiing with my son, just walking in the parking lot, and my knee still hurts. And I'm in good shape.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you think like, I could do that, I'm tough enough to do that, man, if you're not used to your heart racing and getting up like super high and not being able to purposely calm yourself down, you can blow out your ability to respond to something terrifying,
Absolutely. And there's a book, and of course I'm going to forget the author's name, but I highly recommend it to anyone who writes any kind of violence, and it's called Writing Violence. And it's by a guy who was a prison warden. He's like, this is what happens when you get punched in the face. This is what happens when you have a knife thrown at you. And it takes you step by step to how the body actually reacts to that, and what's capable and what's not capable. And I think that's much more fascinating to me. It's like, if somebody in my book gets shot in the knee, that's a big deal. You're not getting up and chasing somebody after that. You've got to deal with that. And I'm just going to say, like, I don't know if this is a Freudian slip, but on your sign for me, it says crater Wilson. So I don't know if that means like my book is going to crater, but I just thought I would point that out. I sign my name that all the time by accident.
That's funny. No, that's not on purpose. That's me trying to do too many things at once. Let me go back to the screen and try to fix that. Let
No
me
worries.
ask. So, look, you figured out the biggest part of this whole equation. You're able to make money writing books. You don't always get to do that. When did you know? When could you go to a party and be like, "Yeah, I'm an author"?
Well, I'll tell you when it happens.
Okay. So what do you say then when you go to a party?
So that's a great question because, in a lot of my life, I have a pretty tremendous sized ego. I'd say I do not have that as a writer. And I think most writers don't. Most writers really suffer from imposter syndrome. And I always thought, I could earn that right to call myself a writer at a cocktail party if I had enough money or made enough money from writing to quit my day job. Now my day job pays me very well and I love my day job, so I still have it. And I've learned how to write in addition to that. But yeah, I'm making money writing and I have 7 books out. So probably a few years ago, if I'm at a cocktail party and they ask, what do I do? I will say that, but I will also say the other job. And it's always interesting to see the reaction, but I never pretend that's all that I do because it's not. And it's very difficult to support a family on a writer's income for 99% of us.
But you are doing it. I mean, you are on professional writer mountain and you are climbing higher, and it is hard. That's one of the things I like to ask people is if I go to a party and I say, "Oh, I'm a podcast producer," like, am I a douchebag? What does that mean? Like,
I don't know. Do people think that's a douche? I don't think that's a douchebag.
It's just, it's a thing. Everybody's got one. It's like, yeah, so what? It's like you mow your lawn. Well, I actually don't mow my lawn. We hire that out. But, but this is the thing. Like, you have to qualify how much success that is. Or when I have an actor on the show, I love the acting game from top to bottom. So if you're just trying to figure out how to get reliable gigs, you're an actor. I mean, that's what you've chosen to do. You've chosen to embrace the pain of that. And so you are an author, but yeah, like, what do you call yourself? A podcast producer. So what? Do you make money doing it? Yeah, a little bit, but I mean, nothing to brag about. Like, I don't do anything else. I am a podcast producer, but boy, it'd be nice if I made some more money.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because it's very easy to also diminish what you do. And so thank you for reminding me, because it's very important to reflect and have that gratitude of like, holy shit, this is further than I probably ever would have thought. Fortunately I went into this not knowing anything, so I didn't know how terrible the odds were to begin with. But that being said, I don't want to diminish what it is I've accomplished or what I do. So, and it's very easy when you tell somebody, oh, I also write books. Then all of a sudden they start thinking it's a hobby. I don't want to give that impression. I'm like, no, this is, I work my ass off for this.
It's not a hobby for you. It's just something.
No.
It's one thing to put a lot of time in, but you drive revenue. You sell books. That's different than a hobby.
Yeah. And I think it's also important that there are other aspects to being an author besides the actually act of writing. It's a business, right? And I have a very strong and deep business background, so I've learned the ins and outs of it. But you've got to do a lot of other things, and you've got to be on a team that gets this done, and you've got to market it, you've got to do PR, you've got to do social media and events, and you really got to get your name out there. So all those things take a lot of time. I started my own podcast because I want to get to know other writers better as well, but that also helps my brand. So it's all of those things. If you just send off your book and just hope for the best, that's just a very small part of the equation.
This is a good part of the conversation right here, because what we're going to talk about now is really going to inform people, because they always show the writer in the movie and they're established. Oh, I write for a magazine or magazine. That's all I do. You're like, come on.
Right.
And you're 28. Wow.
Right.
Your fully established career in your 20s. But I mean, you have to have a strong business sense or develop one, because you've got to be salesman of the year for your book. You've got to be the editor, because you've got to decide. I mean, look, you're going to pay someone else to edit the actual book, but the editorial decisions for what you're going to write about, what the next book is going to be, how much effort you put into a book, when are you done working a book? When are you moving? I mean, 100 things that you have to do. By the way, a website, marketing,
all that.
PR. Oh my God, it goes on forever. As soon as you think you have your hands wrapped around something, you realize there's a wild cat of a problem that you've never even thought about. And you're like, that thing has been tearing my back apart for years,
And you got to be able to afford to do all those things too.
Time and money, baby.
So it is. It absolutely is. I mean, the more that I can hire people to help me, I do it if I can. So whether it's, my publisher has their own PR team, but I always hire a third-party PR team to work with them. I have a very close relationship with the people that do my website, so we're constantly doing updates on that. And we're writing newsletters. I spend hours writing my monthly newsletter because it's really important that I have prime content that people are super engaged and they're reacting to it. Everything's kind of like, oh shit, I got to get that done this weekend. And, oh, by the way, I've got my 9-to-5 job too. So, and I got to write the book also. When is that going to happen?
Seriously. This is it right here though. I mean, this is, I wouldn't say it's the hustle because you're past grinding. You're a polisher now. Like you're taking off some edges, you're making things pretty, but there is a lot of work to do. I mean, I was up to 2 a.m. last night because there's things that I needed to get done and I caught a work groove and I just kept going, because I've got to put out content all the time. You have a newsletter. Matter of fact, you brag about your newsletter. Everybody should go to carterwilson.com. Good job getting your name as your URL. So carterwilson.com, right? And you said like, get my newsletter. It's good. And you're talking about it. I know you're passionate about it. When you write that thing, is the juice worth the squeeze on a lot of the things you do? Or how do you determine that? Because I don't have a newsletter. I don't want to spend time doing it. And I don't want to write something that people are just going to throw in the garbage can, which isn't to say that they would all do that. But, where do you put your effort?
Right. So I made that decision that I am going to really commit to this newsletter. And I love to talk about personal stuff. I hate small talk, which is kind of like why I started this podcast. I want to ask writers like really dark questions or where do you come from? And so my newsletter, I will be very revealing about, something I'm feeling or something I'm thinking and try to make it funny, talk about my kids and And so, I'm like, I can do this once a month. I release it the exact same time on the exact same day every month. And it probably takes me 6 hours to do. I can find time to do that. But that's one thing that I'm 100% going to commit to this. And I've gotten tremendous feedback. Like people are like, this is the one newsletter that I read. And, so it has paid off for me and it helps me kind of promote myself, as a person in addition to being a writer. But it might be at the sacrifice for doing other things that I just choose. Like I'm not super crazy on social media because I just don't have the passion to post every day on Instagram. So you choose your thing, and the newsletter is something I've chosen to be all in on.
You have a blog as well, and you blog about once a month. That's pretty reliable. It goes back pretty far. Is the same story as the newsletter where you're like, I set aside a time one day.
Yeah. So that's basically that's basically highly related and overlapping with the newsletter. So my newsletter subscribers always get the content first. And then I usually kind of strip down some of that and have that as a blog. But the newsletter also includes like giveaways and things like that. And I love, every month I have a giveaway. I have a tell me a secret contest where I just ask some question. I'm like, tell me a memory that makes you laugh out loud every time you think of it. And then people write me and I just choose one and I get great interaction with the readers and great stories.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you also have a tab that says photography, because again, we all have more things that we want to do than we have the ability. And your pictures are fantastic. I'm not saying anything.
No, thank you.
But we all have these slashes in our lives. And some people are good at slashing. Other people are like, I'm not doing this. I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to be a writer. But you're a writer. You're a professional. You're a blogger. You're a newsletter and a photographer and a businessman. Running your own business.
Yeah, it's a decision.
That's my big question.
What is your question?
Are you doing too much? Like, should you? Would you advise yourself if you came up to yourself and said, "Hey, what do you think?"
No, because so I actually wrote about this not too long ago in my newsletter about like, I don't believe in the expression, there's not enough time. Like there's always enough time for something that you're passionate about and you're committed to. There's enough time. You just have to choose what that is. And you'll know, because I know people who are like, why haven't they finished the book? And there's a million excuses. And I realized, well, I think you just don't have the passion there for it. And that's okay. Take playing the guitar. I used to play the guitar. I took lessons because I thought it would be cool to play the guitar. And then I stopped because I'm like, I don't really care that much. It would look great to be a guitarist, but like, that's something I'm going to drop. I can still be at night on my couch, hanging out with my kids, watching TV, and go to bed at a reasonable hour. I'm not staying up till 2 a.m. to do stuff. So I'm highly organized. So everything's got its pocket of time. I only write an hour a day. So, I put aside that time and I get into that world and I get a book done in a year.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, and I'm not often up to 2 a.m. There are times where I have to push hard and do some 17 and 18 and 20-hour days for an extended period of time because there's a project that needs done or something. And there is enough time if you just can work 36-hour days, like you absolutely can find the time. It's just, wow. But I want to ask about the writing part then. So in an hour a day, how long does it take for you to put a manuscript in an editor's hand?
So yeah, my goal is a book a year, and whether it gets published in a year or not, it's, that depends on the publisher's schedule. The biggest problem for me in getting stuff done is I don't know what I'm writing about. I don't know the story. I know, right, I think of an opening scene and that's it. And then the rest of the book is, what is that scene about? So that could be my impediment, but I try to get a book done, a full manuscript, and that means you've written it, you've rewritten it however many times, you've given it to your agent, you've incorporated feedback from your agent. If I can get that done in 10 to 11 months, that's kind of an internal goal that I have. Or if I have a multiple book deal, I have an actual deadline of when it's got to be turned in. And then, but I can do that in 45 minutes to an hour day every day. Right. But you have to keep in mind, you're writing this book and all of a sudden you're getting editorial comments on something that's about to be published next year that you've forgotten about. And your editor says, hey, can you add a subplot in this? And your next month is gone because you've got to go add a subplot into this other novel. Yeah. So all that stuff has to be baked into it, and travel and all that kind of stuff. But I've done it enough where I kind of know myself. As long as I know kind of generally where the story's going, which I generally don't, I can get something done in about 10 to 11 months.
When you are looking at your writing process, I mean, obviously an hour a day, maybe you could do a little more, but most writers I talk to there's some guys who are iron ass guys who sit down like, I'm writing for 16 hours. That's what I do today. But they crank out books at a faster pace. That's their profession.
Sure.
Do you feel like if you were to move on, like, hey, I'm an author, I'm a best-selling author, this is what I do, I sell books, and you're not doing the professional job anymore, do you feel like you would dedicate more time to writing, or do you think you found your pace?
I probably would. I mean, it's like everything else. It's a muscle, right? It's like, I love working out. I'd work out every day, but like when you take a week off, it takes a little while to get back into it. Your muscle for writing, for me, more than an hour, I start to feel like, okay, this is turning into garbage and I'm just making up words here that I'm going to have to edit out. But I think if I were doing 2 hours a day, after a while, that muscle would build. But yeah, I can't imagine that I would ever really want to write more than 2 or 3 hours a day, because just think of all the other cool stuff you could start doing if you had all that time. I go take more pictures, go drive somewhere, more time with the family, outside,
hang out with your kids more,
100%. Yeah.
Do some of that stuff your wife's been bugging you to do,
everything,
floor, all these things that you get away with because you're a writer. Yeah. And I'm not trying to put anything on you, just being funny, because we all have these pursuits where we lock in and you're like, damn, the dishes got done by somebody else, the trash all went out, and I was so focused and nobody wanted to bug. These are the challenges though when you're in a creative endeavor like this.
Well, and the other thing for me is I don't actually like to sit for a long time. So I like to be mobile as much as possible. So I can't, like, the idea of somebody sitting for 4 hours and writing writing just sounds terrible to me. I would feel like my body was atrophying by the second. But some people can just get into that groove, and I would want to just be walking around, for a lot of that time.
I'm going to guess that you feel like you're still developing as an author. Not that you're not good already, but you're continuing to grow. Who do you look at? Man, this guy is ahead of me, and if I can just continue to grow in this direction, I'm going to be golden.
Well, that's a good question. And I think it depends on if you're looking at somebody's career, if you're looking at somebody's writing, because a lot of times it can be two very different things. You start to develop a pretty solid peer group, and you see like, oh, so-and-so got a movie deal, or so-and-so had a breakout bestseller. And, I think my book is as good as that book. I try to let a lot of that go. It's hard sometimes, but I try to let a lot of that go because I realize like it's a lot, it's not all luck by any means. A lot of it's talent, and a lot of it's, the work of the publisher. But a lot of it's outside of my control. So I always ask my publisher and my PR team, like, well, what can I do? Let me know what I can do that I can be in control of. That would be helpful. Otherwise, I just let it go and put it in the hands of others. So to answer your question, I mean, there's plenty of writers. I'm going to go back to Cormac McCarthy again, not ever thinking aspirationally, but just of somebody who I can read and be like, wow, the command of language, and the effortlessness, and I love reading authors who just break rules, and like, oh, I love sentence fragments. I love grammar, ignoring grammar. It's just, like, wow, why did they do that? And does that work? Does that not work? That fascinates me. So I love when that's done well. So again, I always go back to Stephen King as well. He's, I don't like all of the stuff he puts out, but I love that I don't write series, right? So I read Stephen King, and I'm like, most of his stuff is just standalone stories. And that's what I love. I love a whole new story this time with a whole new cast of characters in a different area. And I just love the depth of the wells of that imagination.
Yeah. Stephen King's a different animal, right? He's just this fountainhead of stories, and all he can do is just probably channel them, get them out so that they don't stay in his head. And it stays
right. Yeah, probably.
It's a different thing. But someone like Cormac, if he was sitting down, like, let's say I book him for the show and I'm like, hey, come on, Carter, let's go do this thing, and you're going to co-host with me. What do you want to talk to him about? Like, here's a chance to talk to him for an hour. What's on your list?
See, I love talking to people about stuff that they don't do. So, my fear with talking to Cormac, but he's been asked everything. I'd want to know about, like, what was, when you were growing up, what was that like? Did your parents just let you wander around? And like, do you remember stuff that happened to you in high school that made you think about stories like that? That's what's interesting to me. What was your relationship with your parents like? That was always interesting to me, because you could start to see the roots of like, well, this is what drove me towards a creative field. And I find that most interesting of all. I'm the guy at the cocktail party who, to avoid small talk, I will corner you and ask you what your deepest fear is, and all of a sudden you're telling me, and I find that stuff fascinating, rather than asking you like something about your characters or what book kids? Is it? Right. So,
do you like this pizza?
Yeah, I know. I have a very I don't have a lot of tolerance for that. I can do it as well as anyone, but I would prefer to talk very personally with somebody.
I have evolved when it comes to these kind of situations where a lot of times I just shut up and let the experience happen, because my job is to ask questions. When I was a spy, my job was to ask questions,
right?
And I sort of like, I don't want to control this conversation. I just want to hear how people talk. And I just sort of sit back and I try to turn my producer and podcast host brain off. But it's tough, because that's how I approach conversations now, is like this spy / producer / host. And the one thing the one negative of having a podcast is that I hear every and every
right.
suck of the teeth, all that stuff. I hear all of it now, and I'm like, oh God.
Right.
Walk away.
Well,
and they're wonderful people, but I just can't. I can't stop hearing these things.
If somebody has a tick, and I think what's interesting about what you do is, so you have a real variety of guests on, and I can't imagine that you're able to crazy prepare for everybody. Like I've read everyone's books, and maybe you do, I don't know. But what you do well, and what I try to do is when I interact with people is just to, like you said, I listen to them and you play off of what they say, right? You don't just say, here's my list of questions that I have for you. And I can't, I'm not listening to you. I'm just waiting to get to my next question. Is you're listening to what they're saying, like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that, because you can go into these territories that nobody expected. And that's where I think the real gold is to be mined. And you find out the humanity of each person, regardless of what they're actually on your show for. You start to see like, oh, there's the person that I didn't expect to see. They just came out right there, and they probably weren't expecting to reveal that to me. That's the joy for me in conversation.
There's a couple of things to say about that. One of them is that's by design, by the way. I've learned that through a lot of time in combat zones and asking questions. And when you go out as a spy, the unit and all of the units above you, all of your different various bosses, all have a list of questions. Where are the bombs? Who are the bad guys? Where are the bombs buried? All these things, right? And they're obvious questions. My job is to find out the unknown unknowns, and that's silly. But the reality is if I go out with a patrol of 40 other military people, I need to bring back something unique that the commander doesn't know and is desperate to know once they find it out, right? And that's sort of my job. And you don't do that by asking a list of questions. Some people, I'm sure, do take that approach, but a lot of times, like in the military or the government, if you go to get a security clearance, they're like, "Are you now, or have you ever been a member of a terrorist organization?" No. Are you now, or ever? And they're like,
right.
All these questions. No.
Right.
Because they're not real questions. So you're asking these questions like you're wasting my time. Like I just told. So the other end of it is like if you went to go get a clearance and you're like, "Hey Pete, these guys are going to call you." You're like, "Okay, cool. I know what to say." As soon as they start talking, I tell the investigator, "Listen, this is what I want you to write down. I trust Carter explicitly. There's nothing he's going to do to ever harm the nation. Do you have any more questions?" And then they're like, "I've got to ask all these questions." All of the questions, they're all no.
Right. I know how this is going to go. Right.
And so this is what I learned, primarily in Bosnia by asking just a lot of questions, shutting up. And then I absolutely talk about the gold. I'm looking for the gold. I don't know where it is. I don't know where the mine is, but I know, like, I listen for things, not to you. So I'm not ignoring you. I'm aware of what you're saying. And I've already got several different things that we're going to talk about in my head right now, clocked already, because I'm a pro at this, right? And I can go back and go, okay, now let's go back this. But I want you to develop some of that knowledge specifically so that when I come back, you already have a lot of context for us. And now we explore a different channel of that conversation. Does that make sense how I'm explaining that?
Totally. Yeah, no, I agree. And, even I heard it the other day. It's like sure, everyone's got a podcast. You can say it. I think most people don't do it very well, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I've been on a lot of shows and a lot of them are just whatever. But I think about, you've got an hour or whatever it is to be with another person who you don't know. Yeah. Why would that's rare, right? That's rare to have that in today's world. Why would you not use that to have some kind of really meaningful conversation rather than going through a checklist of things you think your listeners are going to want to hear? When I talk to people, it's what I want to hear, and hopefully my listeners will like it too. But more importantly, it's what's interesting to me. I want to know about you as a person. So I don't know. My podcast is probably going to be a terrible failure.
Well, come on. But the thing is it is a conversation. Like, I'm hoping, there's a lot of goals for this show, but is that people lean in. They want to, it's like two of us having drinks. Like I told you, I prefer to be sitting in Colorado across from you in your dojo at your favorite bar, wherever it is.
Right.
Because you are already comfortable at that point. I'm the one that traveled into your reality. And this is one of the things that I would do as a spy. I would enter the other elements reality, and by other element I mean us, right? Like that home unit that owns that space, that has its mission. I have to understand their reality as best I can, so I can communicate it to the alternate realities, the Afghan reality or whatever it is. And so I'm comfortable doing that. I'm comfortable. I've read maybe 5 pages of your book, and it's not that
hey, 5 pages is not bad,
but I only need to read enough to get a sense for who you are,
right?
And then my prep is done, because you don't get the prep when you go out on a patrol, and you don't get the prep like by reading a book about the person. My job is to understand what the right question is, like what that next thing. And a lot of times that question is one word. Like one of my favorite questions is Dan Rather. He's a master at this. He just goes, regrets. you know.
I had a few.
And then you shut up. You just let it happen. And if you've done your job as a host, that person's ready to jump off the cliff. This is the same thing you do with your readers, though, right? Like, you get to throw these things out there and just their mouth agape while they're reading your words. You never get to see it because you can't be in their living room, but you make people's jaws drop.
Well, I hope so. I mean, but I think that's the other similarity between how I talk to people and how I write is I do it mostly for my own amusement and satisfaction. I don't sit there when I'm writing a book saying, you know, what's the formula that's going to really hit with the readers? I think about, and that's again why I don't outline, because to me, the joy of learning, oh shit, this is what happens. Or I constantly am asking myself, what if this guy just took a bullet to the chest right now? One of my main characters, like, I don't think I'm going to keep that, but what if that happened? I'll write that and be like, oh, that's actually really interesting. So I don't see that coming. So my readers don't see it coming, but I'm doing it for the joy of discovery for myself. And you know, a lot of people tell you that's a bad thing to do, that you should really have your you know, marketing platform in mind at all time and your readers in mind. But I write for my own amusement and my own entertainment. So I think if you do that genuinely, that will hopefully shine through to whoever the audience ends up being.
How much of those exercises make it into the story or into another book altogether?
Yeah, more than I would have expected. I mean, I've definitely lopped off thousands of words of, like, you know, and sometimes you don't even have that right perspective. You still need that other voice to say, you know, this scene feels very disembodied from the rest of the book, and I'll go back and look. And I have a big tattoo on my arm that just says "Kill your darlings," which I completely believe in. It's like, you got to just hack out the shit in your book that, like, even it's the greatest thing you've ever written. If it's not serving the story, you got to hack it out. And I'm good at that. But it's painful. So I don't try to, I don't try to force something in just because I think it's fun and cool. Like, I'm like, does this really serve the story? But usually my instincts are pretty good. Usually I'm like, oh, that's really interesting that's what the ending is. I didn't see that coming until I was there. But sometimes you have to sit on it a little while and digest it.
I don't watch a whole lot of TV, but a lot of times I'll watch those reality competition shows because I want to see how experts advise people who are coming up and everything. And, you know, they all say some form of edit, you know, put your best forward, cut until it hurts. You know, when I talk about hosting with people, slow down to the point, you know, you have to speed up, and don't move the dial at that point.
Right.
You know, because you can always go faster, but if you slow down, you create space and time. And sometimes you want to be frenetic, but sometimes you don't. Sometimes you want to be prolific, but usually you don't. So when you have these things, edit. And then I write a little bit. I'm trying to work on a couple of books that I'm trying to get out of my head. That process to where I have these incredible stories, but they don't all go into a thread. And that's where I struggle the most. And then I say, well, this can just be like a blog entry. This can just be a writing a book. But invariably, that thing that doesn't make it into the longer narrative, usually it kind of just withers and dies because it isn't worth the effort. Like the 100 really cool words, that's it. That's all that's there.
Yeah, totally. I mean, when I'm editing, I will go through it, and it could be a whole chapter that if I don't like it, I'll cut it out and I'll put it into another document I just call scrap. And it just sits there because I think, yeah, maybe I like how I phrased something. I'll use that. But like you said, most of the time I don't ever go back and look at that. It's there, and you just let it go. I think letting go in life is one of the most important things anyone can learn about almost any situation, is knowing what you can control, when to just, it's okay. We're moving on. It's not the end of the world.
I have a bucket of slop, right? I have a Word document that just gets longer every time I write. Throw that in here. Now I don't have to ever think about it again. I don't have to wonder about it. I don't have to miss it. I don't have to, you know, like, it's right there if I ever need it. And I never read that document. I just add to it.
Right.
You know,
but knowing it there comforts you somehow.
Yeah. It's like, I didn't throw this away, but yet I did, because I'm not going through a bucket of slop, because it's a bucket of slop, you know,
right.
And those concepts are there, and there's plenty to work with. I want to go back in time a little bit. We were talking earlier about talking to someone like Cormac, who is ahead of you, and you're like, man, that guy's really incredible, or Stephen King and everything. To learn your craft, to master it, you also have to go the other direction and advise writers who are coming up, who are trying to get to where you're at, where they're desperate. Like, 10 years ago, the 28-year-old you who's like, I can never write a book. Oh my God. And then at 33, you've done it. What do you do to develop that mastery by teaching some other people?
Well, I think I have a unique perspective in the sense that I didn't have any background in writing and creative writing. I come from a fairly creative family, but mostly on the art side of things. So I literally came into writing with zero experience. I was the guy who just plopped down in there. I'm like, how does publishing work? What are agents? I didn't know any of that stuff. Yeah. And so I've been able to have this unique perspective of like, what have I learned? And for me, goal setting was huge. I do this with all parts of my life. Everything is a goal, an achievable goal, maybe not easy, but like when I wrote my first book, my goal was just to get an agent. I'm like, I want to have somebody in the outside world, somebody other than my mother say, yeah, this is good. And then once I got an agent, it's like, okay, just sell one book. And then so there's goals with everything. But really the big one, and this is a cliche because you'll hear it from all the authors, is you got to just write the shit down, right? Like so many people have ideas, but they don't have the discipline. Yeah. And they're so afraid that my writing is terrible, but that's okay because yes, your writing is terrible. My writing's terrible. Everyone's writing is terrible. You just get it done and then you can go back. But yes. the weight that you release by finishing, even if it sucks, is tremendous. And all of a sudden you're like, I wrote a goddamn novel. And that is fuel to keep moving forward. So, but it's not easy to do. And that's why most people don't write novels. So, and again, the passion's got to be there too.
There's a lot of scary things in writing a novel. I mean, I'm struggling to try to figure out which story it is. And I finally decided that it's just multiple books, because I've got a lot of time on combat zones. So it's not just one thing. Okay. So that's great. The other thing, I wouldn't call this a fear. I just call it a practical reality, is that if I spend 2,000 hours writing a book and I make $100 on it, I can't justify that time. I can't justify that loss. And there's no, as you know, there's no guarantee. I can go out and pour my heart and soul into this thing. And, I don't know that I can justify the time. Yes, I have an interesting story, but man,
but you're looking at it as a time value proposition. And I think that's probably my other piece of advice is don't quit your day job. And because I never did. And I would have blown up my life and I written my first book and be like, I'm going to be a best-selling author now. I mean, my first 3 books didn't sell. It was 9 years until my first book appeared on the bookshelf, with a small publisher that went out of business like 3 months later. So it's a cruel and brutal industry. So, if you go into it with like, well, what does this break down on an hourly rate? It'd be so depressing to even try to do those analytics. Right. You got to have the passion there and you got to have the love for it. And you've got to be like, well, if this book didn't sell, would I write another one? And if that answer isn't yes, then it might not be for you.
You think about this. This is my girlfriend's example, so I'm stealing her thing. But the lady that waxes people's vaginas makes, I don't know, $270 an hour, I mean, every 15 minutes, she rips off a piece of wax and then you hand her a check for $75 or so, and then you're out the door.
What a specific example.
Right. So you think like, would you rather spend 2,000 hours writing a book and having your friends be like, hey, that's cool. How's that writing thing going? You're like, I wrote a motherfucking book.
Right. Jesus. Right.
Or you're like, yeah, I rented out a spot in the mall and I just wax vag all day long. I made $500,000 last year. I've got people hired. It's like you can. I mean,
it's funny. It all goes back to your cocktail party example because there is that balance because there is something so fulfilling about being recognized as an author and having written books because people are kind of interested in that. But then it very quickly, edges into like that imposter syndrome. Like, that is funny because I will tell people very quickly like, oh, that's amazing. I'm like, oh yeah, but I still have my other job because I don't make enough money to, I quickly diminish myself all the time. And I hate that I do, but it's true because, you almost like you don't want yourself to feel good for too long.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I do the same thing. I try to be honest, and that's kind of one of my things. And it's not like a watchword. It's just how I'm wired. Like, I want to be honest. Like, yeah, I do a podcast. I make a little bit of money doing it. I wish I made more, but the reality is that I work way too hard for not enough money. But right. I get to talk to Carter Wilson. Holy God. I talked to John Davidson yesterday. I mean, how cool is that? And so the value
cool.
is there. It's just you have to rejigger what's valuable, and then how do you exchange value for a value,
Right. And how do you want to live your life ultimately?
Right.
I also recognize, I've got kids now who are going to go off to college, and you start thinking about, pockets of time that you'll have available after they're gone. And that's why you fill up your days, because you do things that make you happy, and you might have more and more time, as you get older. So I try not to ever feel like, oh, this is too much, because, there might be a point where like, oh, I wish I was doing more.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a couple of ways that you can look at this too. Like, again, Saving Private Ryan, you earn this, and everything.
Right.
You go out and like, I was afraid of writing a book. Why didn't I just write the damn thing? Like, if you're on your deathbed, if you've been shot, if you get cancer, you're like, why in the hell haven't I written that book? Like, this is way harder, surviving cancer or not surviving cancer,
Yeah. And unfortunately for most people, you need that life event, which could very well be death, to get to that realization of like what's important. And so, but you hear it all the time. So yeah, I try to practice that as much as possible. I mean, I have enough, I have enough wasted time as anybody, I'm sure. But I do try to really pursue what feels good to me.
And I wouldn't say it's wasted time all the time. I mean, sometimes, look back and that's a waste of time. But there's so many things where, like, you tried skydiving. You're not going to go out and become a person who spends $10,000 skydiving over the next 5 years. But you're like, yeah, I've done that, and I rode a motorcycle on a racetrack, and I did these things. You'd call it a waste of time. You could also call it the journey, the path. Like, so if it takes you 10 years, I mean, look, the next person that it takes 10 years to write a book will not be the first. They'll be the next person who does that, and they're like, I got that done, and holy cow, I finished it. Maybe you're not a writer anymore. Maybe, like To Kill a Mockingbird, you do one book really good. Everybody waits and waits, and you're like, I'm just not going to do it,
Right. Totally.
It's all the journey, I think, at least. I want to say this too real quick. Here it is. The Dead Husband. Everybody should get it. There's the link on the show. If you're in podcast side, just look in the show notes. You can go to Amazon. Please use our Amazon link. I can't say it enough. Anytime you're going to buy anything on Amazon, that's a big help to us in the show, by the way, speaking of helping us make money. Another way you can help support the show is by going to our link on breakitdownshow.com. There's a PayPal button there. That's my form of Patreon. Patreon takes a bigger percentage. If we just do this direct via PayPal, they take a small transaction fee, and that's it. $5, $10, $20, $100, whatever it is, one time every month, whatever it is. I'm going to put that into doing things like going to Carter's house next time we're together. I'm going to put that in my gas tank. I'm going to put that into equipment. That's how you guys support the show. I'll buy ads with it. I don't need that money. I invest it back into the show. That's how you support me. You support Carter by going to Amazon and buying his book. There's like 8 books you've written now. Is that right?
This coming out is my 7th. Yes, I've written more, but they haven't all sold. I've written 11.
Fair enough. When you look at this, I mean, you look at the marketing part. What do you think? I love to ask this question. Someone who runs a small firm, right? You've got a lot of hats. You wear most of them because you know like the best way to market yourself. You may want to hire somebody, but it's hard to find the person that you can afford and also gets what needs to happen. So oftentimes you end up doing it yourself. What are some of the hats that you would like to get rid of next? Once you hit that next level, you get to that next, like, okay, I can now reallocate more budget money into these things and get these hats off my head.
Well, a big one that's already happened was PR. Like, I've hired a PR firm for every one of my books that I've released. And I love talking to them about analytic. I'm a very data-driven person. So I love to be like, what works, what doesn't work? Because we know there's a lot of magic in publishing and it's hard to tell what's going on. But I also recognize that anything that's beyond my root expertise that I really don't want to learn, I want to hire, because
like website stuff.
Like website stuff. I want to have a slick looking website. I want to have some junky one that I did myself just to save a few bucks, and people know how to connect with more people. You know, I'd probably love to have somebody be active on social media for me, which is a little bit disingenuous, but that's just something I don't have a huge passion for. So if that's proven to help get the word out a little bit, but I love kind of having my hands in a lot of different things, because it's all kind of a learning experience. So I really enjoy doing, or at least, you know, being part of the team that does all of this stuff.
Do you like leading the team?
Oh, usually, I mean, yes. Normally, like, I love leading anything. I want to be the one in charge, but I also recognize what, you know, a good leader knows who's the appropriate person to lead. And a good example is that, you know, my editorial comments, like every time I get comments from my editor on a book, I look at them like, yeah, you're totally right. You know, I agree with 99% of the stuff. And you also know how to physically sell books. That's not what I know how to do. That's not my expertise. So I would always defer to you and not, you know, put my heels in the ground and say, I'm not doing this. Because again, you're working on a commodity. It's not everything. It's not so precious. But yeah, in most situations, if I have the capability and the opportunity, I prefer to be the leader. Oh, your audio cut out.
That's because I had it on mute because there's an airplane going overhead. Leading a creative enterprise like this, you know, you can't just look, you can do whatever you want to do, but I would say you can't just be a dick. Like, I struggle with this too, where I need certain things done, and ultimately it's my responsibility. You know, like, I didn't give you the guidance necessary. I didn't slow down long enough to train you on what I want. I didn't do these things. We need to fix this. So what can I give you? What tool can I give you so I don't have to mess with this anymore? You know, and if it's on me, then it's on me, and I can reallocate my time so that I can get that person either replaced or up to speed with what I want. But if you run around and you're a dick, it's really hard to continue to get those things, especially via email. You're like, you son of a bitch.
Yeah, if you run around in life and you're a dick, then I just don't see how you get much stuff done. I don't see how that's enjoyable for anybody. I mean, I love making personal connections with people. So even when I'm leading a team and I'm a business leader, I love hiring people who their expertise is not my expertise. And so I can defer to them, and I can give them the tools or see what tools that they need and just let them go. And I think that's one of the best ways to lead, is like, hey, you are hired for this specific thing. And yeah, you're ultimately responsible, but I've never, I'm not a dick by nature. I don't think so. I've dealt with people who are pretty aggressive, and it just doesn't accomplish anything. And in the publishing world, the last thing you want to do is be somebody at a publisher doesn't want to work with on a personal level. And you could be a brilliant writer and you could have the story of the century. Yeah. But if you're impossible to work with, you have to realize it's a business, and people it's like being on a conference call of like, who's that asshole? You know, you're not going to last long. You have to be a team player. There's no question about it.
I love to take these things and do the turn of phrase with them. You know, if you're impossible to work with, then you are impossible to work with. You know, like they're not going to work with you. And it's like working in, like, if being a customer in a food establishment, you tend to not want to piss off the people that make your food that you don't get to watch, you know, whatever, where they can twist your profitability back. I mean, in any company, you piss someone off, they can slowly bleed a lot of money out while you still pay them their revenue. You know, like, it's not hard to get 20% less effort out the door because someone's like, F you, you're never going to get anything out of me, you know?
Yeah.
So, hard.
Yeah. My experience has been people who are aggressive in the workplace are usually there's a deep insecurity somewhere there that is manifesting itself that way. And I always find it interesting to try to figure out what that is. Because if you can kind of have that conversation, you can really, I think everybody you can connect with almost anybody on some level. And I love that challenge of like, I'm going to figure out what it is that I like about you. And I want to connect on that level. I love doing that stuff, and people want that to happen. Just some people it's more of a challenge than others.
On the other hand, someone who is a professional knows exactly what they need. Like my buddy works on the backstage team for the Eagles, and there's nothing that you are able to do that does not go into allowing Joe Walsh, and I use Joe Walsh as the example. Joe Walsh has the pants that he wants to wear that night, and they better fucking be on the goddamn coat rack right where I want them. I don't want to have to think about a thing. I want my red pants because tonight is red pants night. And so everything has to be dress. Everything has to be perfect. And you do get to be a dick because there's 40,000 people that just spent a load of money to see us sing. And I don't need to be worried about, where my Kleenex box is or what temperature the water is. Like, I've got to do this every night. I need these things to be there. So you do get to have a standard, but you got to be awfully successful.
Well, yeah, and that doesn't go hand in hand, right? You can have all of those demands and all of those things that are necessary in order to have your performance be what it needs to be and still not be a dick, right? You could still be like polite. You can still say please and thank you. I mean, my kids, like, I drill it into them, please and thank you. Like, I don't care if you think about it or mean it or not. Just, if you're nice to people, it all comes back, and you can and they will be so much happier to make sure everything's perfect if they respect you like that, right? They're going to want to make sure your red pants are there.
And there's always time to be firm. There's always time to blow up and be like, hey, I'm sorry I blew up. It's just, this is really important to me and I shouldn't have taken it out on you. But now the person is like, well, man, I feel like a dick now.
Right. Yeah.
Because they caused you to lose your cool. But there is a standard to maintain. It's just, it's difficult in the creative fields to find, especially if you're emerging, if you're not a fully like, oh my God, like certain people don't have to worry about anything. Matter of fact, they hire someone to take care of the hard stuff. I mean, Michael Crichton doesn't go out and go, oh gosh, could you fix the website today, please? Right. It's just like, do this or I'll get someone else,
Yeah. That's true. And it's probably, I'm sure it must be hard not to lose perspective over time, but we can only wish to be so successful that we have those concerns.
Do you think you spend enough time when you take all of your business stuff? Do you spend enough time on the thing that gives you the most joy, the writing part of it, or is it necessary to spend? And what would you say the ratio is? I mean, including your professional job, is it like 80-20, or how do you balance that out?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Many more hours are spent on my professional job, which I also love. And there's a lot of, there's a lot of passion there as well, in addition to the income. Like you said earlier, like I'd love to write more if I could. I'd love to, the end game, of course, would be a full-time writer. I think that would be a tremendous vision of a life to have. Whether it would actually be great or not, I don't know. But I think the time that I would spend writing would only go up a little bit, but I think I would start to learn more about the holistic nature of being a writer and what other things I can be doing to kind of, I don't know, embody that, whatever that might be.
This wasn't on the show, so I won't say the person's name, but someone I know who's very successful in the arts was saying that, COVID was really hard. They were fine financially, but they didn't get to express themselves artistically. And there's things that they're desperate to do, but because of COVID, and now there's this deluge of work, and they're like, I don't want to have to do all this work, but I have to be someone that says yes, because if you don't say yes, then you're not someone who says yes and you don't get the work. And so this person is trying to sort all these things out. And they're like, and by the way, as I get all this work and I say yes a lot, other things come in the door. Like, I don't know, I'll just make up some stuff like the opportunity to act in the video game or other opportunities that are adjacent to what you do. And this person is like, I'm wondering if I'm going to just burn out and not want to do the creative thing I do anymore. I've realized my dream. And the more I realize it, the less I get to do the dream. And when I do the dream, oh my God, I don't love it like I should. And maybe I can't ever love it again.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I'm actually a big proponent of saying yes. I preach that a lot too, because I think that's a great example of that person because more opportunities come in the more you say yes. And those opportunities might be things that you never would have expected that can lead to things that really enhance everything else that you're doing. You just don't know. So I tend to say yes to most things because I just like to. And I think it does kind of just open that door. But I would posit that that person is maybe saying yes to things because maybe they're not super crazy about the core thing that they think that they love. And maybe it's more of an idea rather than a true passion. Because writing is a pain in the ass, and sometimes I don't love it either. Some days it's data entry, and I do it because I've got to do it. Otherwise, that's the commitment part of it. But some days I'm just looking for reasons. Give me a reason not to write today because I'm kind of over it. So that can be a trap too.
Any questions for me before we move on to the closing part?
No, I just want to say thanks for the opportunity to have a bit of a personal conversation.
Yeah, and everybody should definitely get The Dead Husband from Carter Wilson. You can get that on Amazon. I'll put the link up here on the show. If you are interested, you can always go to carterwilson.com. He got his name for his URL. That's bonus. And just in general, Carter, thanks for coming on the show, man. I appreciate it. I love having these conversations. If people want to find out about the book, buy the damn thing. You give the guy $10, whatever it is, and read it. Because we all need to support one another. And I love that you're out there crushing it. I love that you're writing books and staying on it. I mean, a book a year over 50 years is a lot of damn books.
I hope so. I love
it. All right. Stand by for 1 sec. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much for watching the Break It Down Show.